Hello, hello. It's Derek from One Over Tea and Tao Teaware and The Empty Cup. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so here in China, in these past 2 or 3 days, I've eaten 6 massive meals with my tea master, with his family, with my wife's family, with grandparents, uncles, distant relatives, everyone. It's the 3rd day of the Chinese Lunar New Year. We're day 3 into the year of the long snake. And we're just out of the year of the dragon. And actually, technically, it isn't really the long snake. That's me kind of joking around. Technically, it's the wood snake. The Chinese zodiac has 12 animals, and they come around once every 12 years. But then also within that, there's another cycle that's going on, and that's they're going through the different elements. So right now, it's the wood snake. The next time the snake comes around, it's going to be the fire snake. Then we have earth. Then we have metal. Then we have water. And then it's back to wood. These are the 5 elements that compose the material universe. And so yeah, it's not really the long snake, it's the wood snake. The reason I said the long snake is because this year is a little special. I saw one of my friends posted on WeChat, the Chinese social media that's not Red Note. It's not the Xiaohongshu. Brief tangent before I even start here. The Red Note, the little red book here in China, yeah, it's kind of like Chinese Instagram, but it's really just used by trendsetters. It's used by people trying to show off their most lavish lifestyle. And so it's really like, while Instagram is not a true portrait of, people's social life, Red Note is even more extreme. And so you get on Red Note and you'll see the super rich, the fuardai, like the people with so much money that are just posting ridiculous things. While it is a lens into modern China as a first world country, which I guess a lot of people didn't realize that, it is not, the most typical. It's very, very much painted up. Anyways, I'll probably have to do a bigger tangent on Red Note later, maybe in between the cracks with Dart, because he's lived in China and everything. That podcast is on YouTube. It's a video podcast. Anyways, what I was saying is I saw my friend post on WeChat about the year of the snake having 13 months in it. And I was like, that's bizarre. And I look at it and it's like, okay, they've added an extra month here. There's an intercalary month here. And this is kind of funny with like the talk of daylight savings time. Oh, should we add an hour or take out an hour? And here in the traditional Chinese calendar, they're just adding an entire extra month. This for me, I love this idea of these old calendrical systems. Not only just adding an extra hour or an extra day in February every couple of years, we're adding in a whole month. I love the first time I learned about these things, I was studying the classics. And there was this mention in like a Roman poem or Roman text where it's happening in this like special month that doesn't exist in the normal calendrical year. It's like after February or something like that. They're waiting for spring. And every now and then they just have to insert an X amount of days. I remember talking about this in the Water Splashing Festival podcast episode I did back in the summertime. I forget exactly what episode it is. But during their festival, they have usually like 5 days that are kind of outside of time, where it's just like there's the rotting god and then the god is cleaned. And sometimes it lasts 2 days, sometimes it lasts 3 days, just depending on how many days they need to make up in their solar lunar calendar. And I guess as I'm thinking about all of this, I realize that I do have this fascination with time, this fascination with how humans have often arbitrarily made up means to measure it. And so this is, I guess it kind of goes back. My grandfather had a clock shop. He fixed clocks. In his basement, he had those special goggles with lenses, multiple lenses you can flick on until your eyes just become like microscopes. And he would just like fix tiny clocks. And so in his house, whenever I'd stay over there, every hour on the hour or give or take a few minutes, because these are all hand wound clocks, the whole house would start ding donging, and it's like it's every hour. So I've always had this fascination because there it's you can hear the second time, you see the pendulums and stuff like that, and I've always kind of detested it actually. Just this idea of fine splicing, this time into these analytical increments instead of having that fluid state of existence. And so I've often dreamed of living in a time before clocks. And just imagine with me measuring time by the phases of the moon, by the ripening fruit, by the first snow and the thaw, and the sun being in a specific place in the sky. I just, for me, this is more real, right? In the psychological development of the human mind that has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, what a small sliver of time, ironically, do we have clocks? Do we have this idea of seconds and hours and jobs that call us to not be late? Like, the idea of not being late is absolutely phenomenal. Like this arbitrary time. Anyways, I just really want to shrug off these modern conventions of timekeeping. And so for me, when I see that in the year of the long snake, they've just, added an extra month between June and July, just waiting until the summer solstice, like the sun aligns in the right place and they'll move on, I guess. Really fascinating. But, this does make sense, because if you're doing a lunar calendar and the phases of the moon are usually about 29, 30 days, and you have 12 of those in a month, 12 of those in a year, I think when I check the numbers, it's around 11 days. The Chinese calendar is about 11 days short of the astronomical calendar. And so that means that every 2 or 3 years, the calendar is off by like 30 days. And so every 2 or 3 years, instead of having a leap day, that comes around once every 4 years, they just have an entire month, right? And so if you think of it like the 365 and a fourth days in a year, so that's the astronomical calendar. And so every 4 years, right, we have to add an extra day in February. And anyways, we also do this. It's not totally crazy, but we've just gotten a little more fine. Anyways, this episode is not all about time, but it is something that, the longer I live here in China, the more I feel attached to the Chinese traditional calendar, just because of all of the festivals. The festivals make sense. People celebrate them here. Like Christmas and New Year's came and went, and people, they celebrated a little bit here and there. But the Spring Festival, so many rites, so many rituals, like writing on the red banners you put on your door, writing the big Fu, the character for wealth, and hanging it to invite fortune on your door, the whole Chinese migration of people working in different cities going home, the billions of train trips and car trips, and even just walking outside in my apartment complex right now, I would say 80% of the lights are off in the apartment buildings. Just because everyone's back home with their old family, not living in the cities, they're living in the countries, seeing the grandparents and stuff like that. And so just in these short weeks, so much really feels like it's changing. And so for me, I feel much more sentimental right now about the Year of the Dragon than I did January 1st thinking about 2024. And so that, my friends, is the topic for this episode. This episode is really just a reflection of the last year for me, and for me personally, because it's been a massive year for me personally, and then also for the tea. I want to get into the teas we sourced, the teas that, sold out, the teas we had to repress, a lot of like really cool things that we realized about ourselves with One River Tea, and then also places we want to go in the Year of the Snake. However, since there's so much to talk about here, I might have to split this episode in half. And so the first part, I'll probably focus primarily on me, right? And then the second episode, I'll do more about just the tea focus. I first did one of these episodes back in 2024, looking back at 2023, and I think that's episode 26. And really, for me, that was one of my favorite episodes I did, because I just tend to forget how much happens in a single year. There's so much with just the tea and then my personal life, and then it's something like if I don't talk about it, think about it, sit down, write about it, tell these stories set in stone, the memories, it all just feels like it washes away. Like, I'm like, what did I even accomplish in that year? Which is, interesting because I'm very, Zen or Taoist in my belief system here, where it's like, okay, like, what really is value, right? Like, is it valuable because you remember it, because you've created something that will remain, or is the value the experience itself? I don't know. For me, these moments of reflection are a really great means to appreciate the experiences again for a second time. Like, I'm not so afraid about forgetting them, but at the same time, they are fascinating and interesting. However, I do have the fear of this, this pattern seeking mind of mine to look back at things in retrospect and apply a narrative story sense to it. When it's like, really, me living that life, me living that year is just a string of loosely connected events where I just followed this most logical path. But when I look back on it, it seems like, oh, I did that because of this. And because I did that, then this happened. Which I don't know if that's really useful, because it's like looking at a river from a bird's eye view when you're actually really just rafting in it the whole time, and you don't know when the rapids are going to come. When they come, you face them. When the river bends, you follow it. It's like, it's a different kind of vantage when you're actually living this life rather than reflecting on the life you have lived. Anyways, the Year of the Dragon. For me, I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, I think it was episode 4, when I talk about the Chinese zodiac and I talk about what all these kind of years mean. But last year was the Year of the Dragon. And this is particularly important for me because that's my Ben Ming Nian. This is my year. I am a dragon. And if you know the Chinese zodiac, you'll know it consists of 12 animals. Each gets its own year. And the year you were born determines what zodiac you were, right? And so I was born in 1988. My Chinese zodiac is the dragon. The Year of the Dragon comes around every 12 years, right? And so the cycle goes like this. First, it's the rat, then the cow, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the snake, the horse, the sheep, the monkey, the rooster, the dog, and then finally the sleepy, lazy pig. And I mentioned in that previous episode, I feel like these Ben Ming Nians, like when your year comes around, it corresponds to a pretty important phase in your individuation process, right? And so for every 12 years it comes around, first you're born at 0, right? Then at 12, you're kind of leaving the threshold of childhood, crossing into adolescence. And then it comes around when you're 24. And so when you're 24, you're leaving adolescence into young adulthood. Of course, a lot of people think, oh, 24, you're an adult, but really, come on, guys. Like, who really knows what they're doing at 24? Very few people. Maybe you kind of know where you want to go, where you want to grow, but you don't really. I don't know. Maybe you do. Congrats, but not me. And then for me at 36, that's when I was like, okay, that's really when you're entering adulthood. You know your place in this world, and you're ready to take on that accomplishment and give back to society. And then 48 is kind of that maturation of it, where you really can sit back and kind of, not gloat, but be proud of what you've accomplished. And then 60 is that early elder phase when you're leaving that sense of responsibility, right? Anyways, this is kind of my means of orienting myself for my individuation process. And so for me, when I turned 36, this is my age, right? This is when I felt I should really know what I'm doing and really know what song I'm singing in this symphony, this interconnected life, this tapestry, right? I should know what my weave is. And while it's, a little bit a laughable conceit, right? To say like, oh, of course, you know exactly what you're doing right now. No one really does. No one really knows what they're doing. I believe that. But there's this sensation of belonging, this sensation of being at the right place, the right time, and at doing what you ought to be doing. And this year has really given me all of those sensations in very profound ways. And so I do want to reflect on all of the changes I've seen this year, this Ben Ming Nian. And of course, the first place to start is with the growth of the tea companies. This is the most relevant phase, right? And so I have the One River Tea, where we sell tea. And then we have Tao Teaware. We're selling handmade teaware, shipping out of America. And these two tea companies have just really it's just they've taken on a life of their own. I'm trying to think of like ways to explain it. Like creating a company is so many things, but maybe one analogy that's coming to my mind right now is trying to fly a kite. And so at first you're just running and running and running and running and tiring yourself out, and you get these brief moments of flight. Like the kite will stay up as long as you're running as hard as you can, and as soon as you slow down, it starts to fall again. And eventually, after doing it for so long, you kind of learn the right techniques for it. You learn how to fly that kite, and then it takes less and less energy to get that kite flying on its own. And for One Over Tea, I spent maybe 4 or 5 years running around and deluding myself and deluding ourselves with the notion of flight. Like me, Alex, and Xiaoyan, like we didn't really make any money for the first 3-4 years. But we were content because we weren't actually losing money. We were making like just enough to keep it going. But, all of that's not paying ourselves. That's not counting how much time and the weekends and the off time. And, we were both teaching. And all of our teaching salary was going into funding this project for 3-4 years. We kind of did it a little lazy because we weren't very hungry with it. It was just a labor of love. Right. And then like last year we doubled our orders. We started paying ourselves monthly, which is a hilarious thing. I'm almost making as much as my teaching job. Right. Next year, I hope I can even be able to quit teaching, even though I love teaching as well. It's really helped me grow. And I think these podcasts are a result of having 8 years experience of logically explaining content to people, training new concepts to new teachers, and speaking for hours and hours at a time. Anyways, I love teaching, but at the same time, I do love the mountains. I do love tea. I do love meeting people and learning all about it and sharing it with you. I mean, this podcast here is happening during my holidays. It's happening during my weekends, my off days, the time I can not be teaching or doing website stuff or traveling for tea or doing Teaware stuff or doing meetings. And this is, if I was able to have more time, I could do a lot more of this. Anyways, Tao Teaware, on the other hand, it's really just been snowballing these past 6 months. Dart and I have put in so much work. I mentioned those meetings like 2 weeks or twice a week for like 2 hours every time. We're just always really fine-tuning what we're doing. We're doing podcasts, making videos, we're talking about what the brand is. But as a result, with that really deep intention and the meetings and after, I guess the experience of doing it with One Over Tea, with Tao Teaware, we were able to get it to this state of self-sufficiency after like 2 or 3 years, in opposed to One Over Tea's 5 or 6. And so, maybe with the next project I have, I could get it to self-sufficiency in 1 or 2 years, right? One Over Tea took 6 years, Tao Teaware took 3. Maybe the next one will take 1 or 2. And yeah, Tao Teaware has taught me a whole lot, from taking the experience of One Over Tea, distilling it, putting it in Tao Teaware. Maybe I can take both experiences, distill it even further, and, work at creating, essentially better. A brand or a company is like a little homunculus. It's something you want to live on its own. But at the very beginning, you're just breathing life into it all the time. It's the kite in the wind, right? You make the wind by running, and eventually it finds its own. And so I guess this passion of what I'm doing and trying to find my place in society, as I mentioned that Ben Ming Nian, the year 36, right? I'm like, I should know what I'm doing in society. I should know what I'm giving back to society. I should know my place, my song. And so an Alan Watts quote comes to mind. He says, like, if you really want to understand something, don't ask what it is. Ask what it does. And this really, really strikes me. Because if I'm asking myself what I do, right, that question is really, it's creation. I really enjoy creating systems. I enjoy creating these projects. I enjoy learning everything about it. I enjoy running the business. I enjoy the way I can never get bored because there's so many aspects I need to master, right? Like I need to know how much ply the tissue paper is. I need to know the best place to get, cardboard boxes. I need to know shipping rates by air, by sea. I need to know how to save images through Photoshop to be used by designers. I need to know how to navigate bus lines to get into the rural mountains, the ins and outs of all photography, how to write off expenses, taxes. I need to know how to troubleshoot the website coding. It's really, I could spend all day working on this and not get bored because I'm using so many different elements of my mind and so many different things. It's not just sitting down and working on a spreadsheet for 8 hours. There's a limitless amount of things that I can do. There's the promise of infinite learning opportunities, which for me, that's my dream. And maybe that's not everyone's dream because there is this sense of frustration when you're learning something new, I guess. Let's see, I remember talking to Matt, the founder of Mountain Streams Teas, who sources some really phenomenal Taiwanese oolongs. And he mentioned a term that I guess has been germinating in my head for a few years now. He talked about being a serial entrepreneur. And he has founded other businesses, including this really cool river tracing hiking adventure that operates out of his city in Haidian on the east coast of Taiwan, going all through Toroko Gorge. And he brought up the fact that some people just love doing this, creating new projects, bringing them up to stability, and then creating something new. And, he's certainly an entrepreneur if you want to label anyone anything. And it really just makes sense. Like, the more you create a business, the more experience you get at creating and running businesses, and the better you get at it, the more you do it. It's just the simple catch-22. But beyond the businesses taking off, this year has been huge for me in other ways. Like, let me just think of all of the things I've done this year. I got my Chinese driver's license in March. I got engaged. I proposed to my fiance. I bought a new car. I got married. I signed the paperwork. I got a dog. And just last week, I put the final down payment on a studio in the old district here in my city in Yangzhou, Jiangsu, China. And it's really wild to just say it all like that because I was I feel like I did more. But every one of those things took at least a month, and a month at the best pace, right? If any kind of obstacle, I really wouldn't have been able to accomplish that much this year. And so what I really want to do is kind of go back through and talk about them all. But one thing that really has struck me about this year, there's two more quotes here. The first one is Paulo Coelho's Alchemist. Maybe I've mentioned this before. It's from his Bildungsroman novel. Somebody seeking alchemy and seeking treasure and finding it anyways, I won't ruin it. He says, when you want something, the whole universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. And I definitely felt that. I felt like there was this, relationship between me and something greater and pushing me on, where it's just the next step in the path just found my feet, right? I was just walking blind and it all happened. So another one from Joseph Campbell about following your bliss. He says, when you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. And yeah, these two quotes have been in my mind about a lot of the decisions and the obstacles, the perceived obstacles I've overcome this year in obtaining my goals. So let's break it down real quick. The first, and probably the most mundane of the list, but by no means the simple accomplishment, was getting my Chinese driver's license. So that I wanted it so that I could rent a car in Yunnan and drive all out to the distant tea mountains that are not connected by trains or buses. And I found out that, I have a American driver's license. I've been driving since I was 15. So somebody can do the math on that. I've been driving for a really long time. Always into high school and stuff like that. 45 minutes both one way and then 45 minutes the other way. A lot of highway driving. just really like second nature kind of in a car. I've lived all my life in a car, really. I mean, I was thinking about that was like as a baby, as I was already in cars and stuff. Anyways, I've been driving forever, and I realized when I moved to China, the city is so small. They have e-bikes, they have electrical, Vespas, small motorbikes and stuff like that, where you don't really need a car to get around. And I've really enjoyed that. And so for the past 8 years, I've just been like, walking, biking, e-biking, taking taxis, taking buses, taking trains, and really loving the fact that I don't have to think about where to park. This is my least favorite part of it. Everyone's least favorite part. But to get a car is also a prerequisite to get married, right? And so this is where I talk about, the narrative structure of, of course, you got that car so that you could do this, the driver's license to get the car. I mean, really, like when I was initially thinking of getting the driver's license, I wasn't thinking it's so I can buy a car and get, and get married. It was more so that I could get out into the mountains. So, like I was saying, I already have my American driver's license, and it's, still valid. I went back and I renewed it and stuff. And in China, it's actually pretty easy to get a driver's license if you have an American driver's license or another country's driver's license, as long as they're driving on the same side of the road. Sorry, Japan. Sorry, England. Sorry, Australia, I think. In China, you drive on the right side. In China, the cars have the steering wheel on the left side of the car. Anyways, so I've had that, and all I really have to do is I have to take the paper test to do it. However, I need to get everything translated. And the translating the documents is I need to translate my driver's license, my residence permit, where I'm living and stuff like that. And I need to go send all of those documents into the DMV here in China. And I remember going there and trying to get my driver's license, schedule the test and everything. They look at my visa and they're like, oh, your visa only has 6 months left in it. If we give you a driver's license, it's good for 5 years. I don't know if we can give you a driver's license for 5 years if you're only going to be here for 6 months. And so I had to start talking them through it, like, check out, I've been here for 8 years, I'll be here for a really long time. And they really just didn't want to do it. And so I think the first day I got turned away. But in China, a lot of times, you just have to try again another day and get another person in a different mood, and they will let you do it. And so I went back, I think the next day I planned it out. I went back after lunch. The first time I was there before lunch, like right before lunch, and I was like, maybe the people were just really grumpy from being hungry. And so I waited until after they had eaten, and I went back, and they were like, oh yeah, it's fine. They let me schedule the test. And so this is like early March. The test is going to happen like a week before I go and leave for tea in April. And I remember first going out to Hangzhou in late March, talking to all the green tea people and kind of bragging like, you know what, I'm going to go take my test, my driver's license test tomorrow. And I remember my friend Shan was like, oh, really? I failed it my first time. I was like, wait, what? It's hard? She's like, oh, yeah, there are a lot of questions. So I'm like, really? How'd you study it? And she's like, oh, there's this app. So I look at the app and I look at it, and there's a practice test that has about 1,000 questions on it. And the test itself has 100 questions, and you need to get a 90% or higher to pass it. And I started, taking the questions, taking the test, doing the practice test on the train back from Hangzhou. And most of them were pretty easy. Most of them are like, okay, like if somebody is trying to merge into the lane in front of you, what should you do? A, speed up and don't let them in. B, honk your horn loudly and flash your lights. C, slow your speed and let the person merge. I wonder which one is the answer here. Other ones were a little more confusing. I remember the ones that kept getting me, I was trying to guess the potential jail time you would get if you were involved in a hit and run or something like that. And it's like, oh, you were involved in a hit and run, and you left before the police could arrive. How many years in prison, if it was fatal, could you receive? It's like 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, no less than 10. And I'm like, of course, no less than 10 is the trump card. Like every answer is no less than 10, but nope, it was 2 to 4 or something like that. Those questions were really difficult. Another issue was like the poor translation of the test. It was a translation from English or from Chinese into English, and some of the questions, like some of the answers were different, but I couldn't tell why they were different. Where it's like, oh, you see a yield sign, what should you do? And it says like one's like go straight forward, and the other one was go forward and yield, and another one was like like slowly approach the yield sign. And I'm like, what? And I just had to memorize. The answer was slowly approach the yield sign. Okay. One funny one about the test was the homemade vehicles. There's so many. I think I saw like 20 trick questions about homemade vehicles, and they were all just like, it's legal to drive a homemade vehicle on the road in China if you have insurance. True or false? The answer is false. It is always illegal to drive homemade vehicles on the road in China. Another question would be like, oh, it's legal to drive a homemade vehicle if you have passed the safety inspection and you have a valid license. True or false? False. You cannot drive a homemade vehicle in China. And so if you are loving making homemade vehicles and you're thinking about coming here to China and testing one of those out on the roads here, don't. It's illegal. It's not allowed. They would take your driver's license from you. But you probably wouldn't even get it because you would miss all of these questions. Anyways, I took the test and I passed. I missed like 3 questions, none of the homemade vehicle ones. And I was really surprised because I passed the test and they're like, oh, go take this over to the room next door. I take it over to the room next door and they print me a driver's card, a driver's license. And I have it that day. I'm like, great. Like it's May 28th. I have 3 days until I'm leaving for a month. And have zero experience driving a car on the road in China. And you'll have to have visited China or Southeast Asia to know that the roads here can be chaos. Like totally crazy. Bikes everywhere, e-bikes everywhere, cars that don't seem to follow the rules. But I've been driving in China for a while now, and I like it because people are very aware of what's going on. Even if it seems like they're not following the rules or not using their blinkers, very few accidents because people are just kind of like hyper tuned into it, it seems, from my perspective and experience. Anyways, my plan there, I got that driver's license, and my plan was like to fly to Yunnan, Sichuanbana, rent a car, and then use that to drive 3 hours down hitchback roads in the mountains, like between like logging trucks. And I thought better of it, and I decided not to do it. And so I went through this whole plan and then eventually just kind of like bailed on it. But it came up later because I did end up buying a car. So yeah, this brings us up to April. And in April, I'll save that for the next episode when I talk about all the places I went to, because I'm really amazed that all of these new places were from this year. When I'm revisiting it, like Dongguo and Shaohusai, and a lot of really neat new places I've never been to that I first went to this year. But anyways, I come back in May, and during that time, during April while I'm gone, I really want to bring my girlfriend to America to introduce her to my family, for everyone to know her, and then hopefully propose to her. And so during that time, we're trying to get her a visa. And so she's filling out all of the paperwork. We got an agent to help us with it. Getting a visa to America is one of the more difficult countries to get a visa to in China, if you're Chinese, being the American-Chinese relationships being the way they are. But we had an agent, we applied for all the paperwork. And so when I get back in Yangzhou in May, we go up to the U.S. Embassy, or the embassy in Beijing, to apply for the visa. She needs that face-to-face interview with the visa officials. And so this was another huge hurdle because, if she didn't pass that interview, we couldn't get the visa. We couldn't go back to America. We couldn't see my family. Maybe I wouldn't have even proposed. Like, maybe I wouldn't have gotten married. And so many things are impinging on this, yes or no verdict here. Anyways, it all happened without issue. We went there to Beijing. We enjoyed the summer palace, the roast duck, went down some hutongs, those small alleys, really got a nice sense of Beijing. However, I will say that Beijing is still one of my least favorite cities here in China. It's just, I don't know. It's too big and oppressive. Spent so much time in cabs or subways. it doesn't really have that earthy, lived in vibe that you get in like the southern China with a lot of folk culture, folk religions and stuff like that. It's much more impressive Chinese power kind of vibes you get up in Beijing. Anyways, there are some cool things going up there, like Da Shui, Jia Dao, some cool tea houses. I really want to give it another try, but every time I've been there I've just come back thinking meh. Anyways, she got a visa to America in May. It's a 10-year multi-entry visa. I think the way it works is she can stay for up to 180 days during each trip. And she has as many entries in 10 years as she wants, which is, quite a nice visa. I want to get one of those for China because right now my work visa, I can stay here for a year, but it seems very contingent on me working, right? So naturally, we didn't want to book any plane tickets until we got the visa. And so as soon as we got the visa, then we looked at the plane tickets. And I was planning on going in the summertime because I'll have a break for summertime. However, we saw that was really expensive and the cheaper flights were happening in like 3 weeks' time. And so I called in some favors at the school. I got the right time off and we booked a ticket in early June, which is just like wild how fast everything is happening. And this is what I mean, where it's just like sometimes I felt pushed or compelled on this path where everything was not only working out right, but it was happening ahead of schedule. So we take that 11-hour flight from Shanghai to Seattle, and this is my Chinese girlfriend's first time in America, and so she really didn't know what to expect, and it was really fun just see her reaction on so many things. Like every time I would do the conversion for how much things cost, she would just like gasp at it and be like, why is it so expensive? Like from Uber, like we take DDs all the time. DDs are the Chinese Uber, and it starts at $9, which is like $1.50. And so saying like a small trip for like $40 and then realizing like you should have to pay tips for it just blew her mind. Like chicken at the grocery store, she's like, why is it so expensive? And I have a funny video of her trying to buy like just random snacks because she had no idea what they were. She's like, has a bag of Funyuns, right? and I'm like, what you buying there? She's like, oh, these are onion rings. I'm like, are they? Anyways, she tried them. Too salty, didn't like them. Gave them to my brother's my brother's kids. A few things she did love about America is the construction of the houses. Here in China, everything is like poured concrete. It goes to like the studio we bought, apartments here. It's just solid concrete walls. And so things get really, really cold in the winter because concrete doesn't insulate very well, doesn't hold a lot of heat. And so sometimes it feels colder inside than outside. And vice versa in the winter time or in the summertime, sometimes it's so hot inside. And it's like, I don't know, it kind of feels like you're living in a cave. But when you turn on the AC, that cool air is not really kept very well. And so just seeing how nice the American houses, the insulation, the construction really impressed her. Like how ice cold it can be on a hot, brutal summer day. She was really surprised how like Americans' eating habits. And this is more in the way that we skip meals a lot. We eat late. We don't eat on time. And she's like, don't they get hungry? Like, why is nobody eating? Here in China, it's very like the traditional Chinese medicine. You're supposed to eat on time. Like the body creates stomach acids at specific times to help you digest food. Really, really funny just seeing these different kind of cultures. Oh, and yeah, like I could go on, which I probably will because this is a fun topic. Because you don't realize how strange your own culture is until you have somebody from another culture come and visit. She was impressed how polite people were waiting in lines. Like I kept having to pull her out from cutting in front of the lines just because usually China is very casual. Where if you have a question that can very quickly be asked, you just go right up to the front of the desk and you're like, oh, is this the right place that I'm supposed to be in? Instead of like waiting in the line in front of other people who are asking. Anyways, she was happy so few people smoke cigarettes, or she can't quite see the people who are smoking cigarettes because here in China, just today in the elevator, somebody was smoking a cigarette. And it's just like, man, like having somebody smoking a cigarette in the elevator that you're in really is a bummer if you don't smoke. It's a lot of fumes in there. She was impressed how polite people were, right? Instead of like pushing by you, they would say, "Oh, sorry." They if they bumped into you, yeah, it's a Midwest saying there. She also had a few questions that were hard to answer. Like she's like, "Why don't I see anybody?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? You see people all around?" She's like, "Nobody's outside." I'm like, "Oh, it's a hot day." She's like, but nobody's on the sidewalk. Nobody's walking. I don't see anyone walking anywhere." I guess where I live, it's not deep in the city, and so people drive cars. I'm like, "Yeah, people are just in the cars. Like everything's really far away." She's like, "Huh, okay." The tipping for her, that's something that we have to get used to here. We're just like, oh, like why do we have to tip, the people who are serving us food? And I'm like, oh, well, it's because they get a lower salary. And she's like, why? I'm like, because they get tips. And she's like, well, why don't they just get a regular salary and then we don't have to tip them? I'm like, huh. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like moving the goalpost there, where it's just like, hey, the company doesn't have to pay you as much because the customers, the people at there will pay you in tips. It's like, it's kind of cheap, It feels kind of strange. And I guess I've been on both sides of this, where I've worked in places where I've gotten tips. And at that time, I guess I was also still very upset. Where I'm like, this is an excuse for you to pay me less because I'm getting tips. It's really kind of a bogus system there. A few other things she was really impressed with is something she had never seen before, the dish disposal in like the sinks in the kitchen, where you flip a switch and just grinds up all the food in your in your sink. She kept wanting to put stuff down there, and I was like, yeah, I guess when I was a kid, I'd love to do that too. Just throw a bunch of ice down the dish disposal and see it crunch it all up. Ice, that was another one. She was like, an ice machine in your house is absolutely insane to her. She doesn't drink any hot drink, or she doesn't drink any cold drinks. It's not good for your stomach. It's not good for your internal organs. She only drinks hot stuff. And so to think of like, here's a machine that makes your drinks cold is like, a terrible idea to her. Oh, dryers, clothes dryers. We don't have those in China. Of course, like we know about them, but it's like it's a rare luxury to have in China. Like you usually have a clothes washer, and then you hang your clothes up to dry. And so having like fresh, hot, warm clothes from the dryer was fantastic for her. But if you ever get bored with your life and your culture, try and imagine somebody from another culture experiencing it. I remember I first got a taste of this in like, Anthropology 101. And it's like we had this little essay that we were supposed to read. It's the body ritual among the Nakurmea. Body Ritual Among Nakurmea by Horace Minor. And it talks about all these weird things this strange tribe of people do. Like attacking their teeth and their gums with like sharp bristles every morning and stuff like that. And eventually you realize, oh, you're talking about Americans. And just it's American backwards. Anyways, it was a fun kind of alienation or seeing something fresh in a new way. However, it went both ways, where she was able to introduce a lot of cool Chinese things to my family, right? My older brother, for instance, loves running, right? He'll run, over 10 miles a day in the morning. Like I remember one morning he ran 18 miles just because. And he was like telling my fiance, or I guess my girlfriend at the time, about how he likes to do the scraping. Sometimes that helps his calves and stuff relax. And this scraping is actually a Chinese traditional medicine technique called like gua sha. And she actually brought all of her gua sha stuff. And so she helped him out, teaching him the right techniques for gua sha, helped his wife as well, because she had a shoulder problem and everything. It was really cool seeing this exchange. She also cooked like a lot of good like Chinese chicken soup. And so the chicken soup we make here is like, we'll get a fresh chicken from the market, we'll go to the market, which is right outside of our apartment complex, and we'll pick out a live chicken. They'll kill it. They'll pluck it. They'll cut it up for us, and then we'll cook it into soup. But the way they cut it up is they just kind of take a big cleaver and chop it into bits. And so you'll have a bunch of bones with like meat on it. And the bones of the meat on it, it helps to make a soup because you have the chicken bones. It creates its own broth. And so she made that soup for, for our family. She didn't kill a chicken, but we got a whole chicken, and then we just chopped it up so that it had all the bones and stuff. A unique kind of experience for them, but the kids drank all the soup, so it was fantastic. They seemed to like it a whole lot. But anyways, it was on one of the days we went hiking out to the Snoqualmie Falls. It was out in Washington. My brother lives in Seattle. And we went to the Snoqualmie Falls. We did that beautiful hike, and it was there that I had, the wedding ring, the flowers, and I had my brother on camera duty, and I proposed to her in front of the falls, which is, pretty interesting right now because I found out that that particular waterfall is featured in Twin Peaks, the late David Lynch's masterpiece. So it's really cool, especially with everything going on, that it has that other layer of significance. I did it because it was a hike that my whole family has done. Everyone kind of really likes that area. And so it had a special significance to me and connection with her and my family. And anyways, it was a beautiful time. My brother, though, has like 3 kids. They're all like, kindergarten, first grade kind of age. And they're bombing the video of me doing the proposal, and like there's the end of the video, the oldest daughter comes up and she goes, "Uncle Derek, why did you do that?" And it's just like then the video cuts and it's like, great, that's the really nice proposal video. It's really sweet. I'm gonna tease her about it when she gets old enough to be embarrassed by it, though. So long story short, she said yes. And so at this phase in the story, she becomes my fiance. So this is in June. We come back to China, and I have this intensive summer camp of classes that I teach. It's part of like that deal I did to get the time off to go back to the States. It's like a month and a half of like really intense, like long 5-day weeks. Yeah. Anyways, I did that. That eats up my summertime. It's one interesting thing I kind of brush over on the podcast that's all about tea is part of my personal life, where I do have this other job. Like I am an English teacher here. And so I'm doing this all of the time. And it's really like, if you want something, right? If you want your own company, like I'm doing, you really just have to grind for it. Like there's no other way around it. Like I'm working 2 jobs, 3 jobs now that I've started my second company. Like I joke with the other teachers that, they ask me what I'm doing on the time off on the holidays. I'm like, oh, I finally have time to do my other work, right? I finally have time to do One River Tea or Tea Soup or Tao Teaware. And I don't know, I think it's a Lewis Carroll quote from Alice in Wonderland about the Red Queen, where she's like, they're running, and Alice is like, why are we running? It feels like we're not getting anywhere. And the Red Queen's like, oh yeah, you just run to stay in place. Like if you want to get anywhere, you have to run twice as fast. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the nature of the beast here, at least as far as I've been doing it. If you have a better way, let me know, because that would be really cool to find a shortcut. Anyways, after that intensive summer course, then I end up buying the car. And so I mentioned this earlier. Buying a car is important in China if you want to get married, right? And there's a few rites of passage here in China that you must follow. This is getting more traditional. A lot of newer China and the cities, they don't really follow these requirements necessarily or to the T or by the book. And so as China modernizes, you get the bigger cities, people living in, Shanghai and Guangzhou, Shenzhen, they're probably not following this quite as much. However, the rites of passages are something like this. Maybe I mentioned it before. You need a house. You need a car. You need a good job. You need gold, engagement jewelry, and sometimes you even need a bride price, or the Sai Li. The Sai Li is fascinating. It was one of my favorite things to ask people when I'm traveling throughout China, like, oh, what's the Sai Li here? Like, what's the bride price here? Because it varies based on the province, usually. And so the bride price, if you don't know, it sounds pretty ridiculous. It's the opposite of a dowry, right? The dowry is kind of like what your wife's family brings to you. And then the bride price is what you give to your wife's family. In traditional China, a lot of times the bride will leave the her home, her family, and move in with the husband's family. And so if you have a daughter, you essentially will lose your daughter to your husband's family. And during all of the holidays, the wife doesn't go back necessarily to her family. She goes to her husband's family. And so you're kind of losing this, instead of like on the other side, as if you have a son, you gain you gain a daughter. If you have a daughter, you'll eventually lose the daughter. And so in the ancient times, the Saili is almost like this form of compensation, right, for the loss of a daughter. And so it's like you pay them a sizable sum. I think here in Jiangsu, it's kind of middle of the road. It's about $10,000 is like the Saili, and in Fujian, it's even higher than that, like up to 30,000. And so it tends to vary from province to province, but then also varies from family to family based on the means. Like the people who are better off require a lower bride price, stuff like that. However, also it's technically in the gray side of the law now. It's kind of illegal to ask or demand for a bride price. However, if you report your bride's family for asking for a bride price, you're usually not going to get married. Anyways, it's an interesting thing. Again, it has its roots in tradition, and a lot of times, even these days, like the bride's family will just give it back to the bride, right? And so it becomes, their feeling that you have security. And so a lot of this is all about security. The car, buying the house, buying the gold. These are all things that's like, gold holds its value. Real estate holds its value. And so you're kind of demonstrating to the wife's family that you have the means to support a family of your own. Anyways, so the first thing to get my wife's family's approval was to get that car. And I was going to get the car, and then I was going to meet them for the first time. And let's see. So I mentioned earlier, I really don't like driving in China. And so I've never really wanted a car. I got that driver's license so I could rent a car and get out into the mountains, but I didn't really think I was going to get it so that I could buy my own car. But this became like the first step to, getting in good with the family, whom I haven't met yet. Or I have met now, but during this time in the story, I had not yet met them. And so, buy a car and show up at the house. Okay. Proves to them I'm very serious, so that I'm following the traditions and whatnot. Anyways, my wife and I start to look for a car, and we end up deciding and buying the car within a week. You'll see a trend here. My wife and I are very decisive kind of people. In the Myers-Briggs test, I'm an INFJ, and she's an ENFJ. And that J part for us is what we kind of fixate on. It's that ability to make decisions instead of merely perceiving a situation. And this is something that has really grown in me the older I get. Like when I see something wrong, I fix it. When I see something that needs to be done, I do that. I don't wait. I don't ask. I don't look and see if somebody else is going to do it. I just immediately do it. And so we saw we needed the car. We asked a bunch of people. We test drove a few cars and really decided it really, really quick. Now, I'm really happy with the car we decided on. At first, I didn't care so much, but it's really grown on me. The name in Chinese is Biadi, and the English translation is a little cringe. It's Build Your Dream. I really wish, I like Biadi. It sounds much better than Build Your Dream. But this is an interesting kind of car. They've started making this hybrid gas electric car. And it's gotten a name for themselves. Some people call it the Chinese Tesla. Take that, Elon. And it's actually really nice. Like it meets all my needs. Really affordable. It costs like under $20,000 for a brand new one. And I've already put 2,000 kilometers on it. Handles the highway, the city driving very well. Prioritizes gas on the highway, electric in the city. I use it to drive to work in the winter, and it cost me, I think, $2.50 or so to give it a full charge of electricity, and that'll last me about 2 weeks. And so Biati is not a sponsor of this podcast, and even if they were, I wish they would, and they could give me some money here. It's a free podcast after all. Anyways, this does not include sponsors. Anyways, I decided to buy it that week, and while it does have this rather obnoxious, big, 14-inch tablet interface in it that tells you your directions and everything, it's cute, it's quirky, it does everything I want. I even named it. I got a little too attached. Its name is Xiao Sudong Po. Sudong Po is my favorite Song Dynasty poet, Su Shi. Anyways, I bought it, drove it to meet her family the next day, the next week or something. And yeah, brewed her grandfather some really nice dragon well. Everyone's green tea drinkers up in Jiangsu region. After that, I got the marriage customs of buying the gold, the necklace, the bracelet, the earrings. A very just ritualistic kind of thing here. Actually, when I first got to China, I was really confused because I didn't see anyone really wearing wedding rings. And so I was like, are people not married, or are they not showing it off? Like, why are they not wearing their rings? Really, like, there's a gold bracelet that's usually more symbolic of marriage than a golden ring. And so as soon as I realized that, I started seeing everyone I knew was wearing like a gold bracelet. I'm like, oh, interesting. Just different customs that, are not really explicit, I guess. Okay, so this is August going on September. And I just introduced her to my family. I proposed. I got the approval from her family. I bought the car, bought the jewelry. I'm still missing a few things. I'm missing the house. I'm missing the Siley. And I'm missing that formal wedding. And so what I did for the house, I started talking to her family about, the houses I had in mind, because unlike car prices, the housing market here is wild. Typically very overpriced, especially compared to what you can get in America, just because the population is so high, the demand is so high. And also, China's kind of a construction economy. And so there are so many new apartment buildings going up everywhere all of the time. There was actually recently a bit of a crash in the housing sector after COVID. My gym trainer told me that he bought a house in 2021 and it lost its value about 30,000 US dollars in the past few years. And so the housing market, everyone's talking about how bad the housing prices are, and so very few people are selling them. And so I'm looking at this. Of course, that would make it sense. It would be a good time to buy it because the prices are so low. But at the same time, I remember taking a taxi one December day in Wuhan, visiting a friend. I was taking a taxi from the train station to his part of the city in Wuhan. And there are apartment complexes after apartment complexes. It's like, 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at night, and there's like no lights on. I'll see like 2 or 3 lights on in every apartment complex. I'm like, are people not home? Like, do people not live there? Are those all empty? It give me this really surreal feeling, like 25-story tall, dozens of these buildings with like, a handful of lights on. It made me think there's so many apartments just sitting empty here that, they're building too many. There's not enough demand. And so, yeah, the crash is definitely bound to come. Maybe we're at the bottom of it, but maybe it could keep going. And so I struck a deal with my fiance's family. I didn't want to buy a brand new apartment because there were just way too many of them. What I wanted to do is I wanted to buy an old house in the old town and turn it into a studio for tea. For a studio for tea, teaware, ceramics, an event space, something like that. And I was so happy because not only did they agree, but they started kind of saying like, this is very sound. Like, this makes a lot of sense, like good business aptitude. But that's all easier said than done, right? A few months go by and we're looking for places. But again, like I said, this is a good time to buy, not a good time to sell. And so very few people are willing to sell their properties right now because it's so low. They're waiting for it to rise again. However, I've essentially proven myself to the family. We've checked off a lot of the boxes and we're ready to, kind of make it official before we do the proper ceremony. And this is another interesting thing where a lot of people will do this in China, is like they'll go to the courthouse, they'll sign the paperwork. And that's just like, okay, whatever. We do that. We're officially married. And then it'll be like 3 months, 4 months until the actual like wedding ceremony. And so, yeah, we picked a good date, went to the courthouse, signed the paperwork, and boom, we're married. But again, it didn't quite feel real, right? And so we kind of wanted to celebrate with friends. And so we started planning it like, oh, we'll have a small get together. We'll invite this person and this person. Oh, and these people and those people. And then eventually it's like there are 20 people on the list. And we're like, you know what? Let's just do a friend's wedding. Let's do an informal like wedding party. And so we're looking at that, and it's mid-November, and it's like, okay, like if we want to do it outside. We got to do it fast because it's going to get cold. And so yeah, we plan it for like early December. And again, here's another thing where it's just like it happened ahead of schedule because we weren't really planning on it, but it made sense and we had to do it quickly. And so we planned the wedding party, and it was, just a blast. Like everyone came out, celebrated with us. It felt so good, but it also kind of felt like it was, we're doing it backwards, right? Also, we did take a trip to Japan where everyone was like, "Oh, is that your honeymoon?" We're like, "No, it's not." We did that in October. But it kind of felt like it, where it's just like, okay, we did the honeymoon, then we made it official, signing the paperwork, and then we had a reception. We're still waiting for like the actual wedding ceremony. Doing it all backwards. Anyways, things will happen at the right time, with the right people, at the right place. And so everything about this has just felt very, very natural and unforced, right? I mean, certain things we had to make our decision. We had to really put our stuff on the line for. Which, speaking of, after we did the wedding party, that's like, mid-December, okay, then comes Christmas and New Year's, and we still haven't found a place. And so what we do is first day of the New Year's, actually, January 1st, we go into the Old Town again, start looking at places, and we find one that we kind of like. We look at it on Monday, and we really like it. We see a few others, and then eventually we find out we're both thinking about that same place. And so we go check it out again, and eventually put in an offer, and then deal with the offer, sign the paperwork on Friday. So it's just like, we haven't paid for it at that point, but again, it's like we saw it, we liked it, we signed for it, all within a week. Just really, really wild. We put down the earnest money and everything. Now, again, this place was also affected by the housing crash a little recently. So in 2021, the asking price was like $160,000 US. This is a tiny place. This is 66 square meters, but it's in the old district of Yangzhou, in the Guanling district that's, been around for 2,000 years, people living there. And the city center is built in another area. Like, this is the old city center, and the new city center is like further west. And so this whole area, so many people are living here, it's not really going to get demolished. It's essentially a historic old district. And so a few years ago, it was $160,000 was the asking price. The bid we put in was $110,000. And then the final price that we agreed on was $120,000. And so like now is a good time to, buy it when it's low. As I mentioned, not a lot of people are selling their places here, but this guy is an old timer, worked for the government. The government basically gave him this house. And he has a daughter who's studying in Paris that just graduated, and she's coming back to China. He wants to use this money to buy her a new house. So all worked out. He's really happy. We invited him for tea once we get it going. And yeah, I think this is where I'm going to end the podcast, right around here, because I'm just so excited and I want to talk more about the empty cup. That's what we've named it. This is the empty cup tea space. And the idea here comes from Lao Tzu. That's the Tao Te Ching, chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. The 30 spokes converge upon a single hub, yet it is the hole in the center that gives use to the cart. A vessel is made of a lump of clay, but it is the empty space within that makes it useful. We make doors and windows for a room, but it's the empty space that makes the room livable. Thus, while the tangible has advantage, it is the intangible that has use. And so too with your heart, with your mind, with everything you approach this life. Be empty and allow yourself to be filled with it. And this is me emptying that cup again, reliving that incredible dragon year and getting it out and getting empty and ready for the year of the snake to come in. So, guys, thanks for listening to this rather personal episode. This is Derek from One Over Tea, from Tao Teaware, and from the Empty Cup Tea Space. Brew happy, guys.